All right. Welcome to this week's live office hours. We do it weekly, Wednesdays, 2 to 3 p.m. EST. Eric's already jumping in here first. I love that, Eric. Appreciate you jumping in here. I wanted to, as everybody's jumping in here, just a little bit of context, because I know we have a lot of new users and a lot of new viewers here. This is a very open-ended thing. This is just a hour once a week where Casey and I sit down with you guys and answer any questions you have. As broad as you want them to be. We love going down rabbit holes. We love geeking out with different stuff. But I'm going to kick us off here just to kind of get the ball rolling, because I've made a lot of predictions in my seller career, and one of those has been robotics. And when I made that 10 years ago, it felt way too futuristic, but I'm just like that, in a far distant future, totally possible. Well, a company I follow called Figure is building Android robotics for commercial use. And they have been working in BMW factories in a very small use case. However, they released a new demo video because they came out with this thing called Helix, which basically allows the robots to work together. So I'm gonna walk you through and show you guys basically what's happening, and we'll talk about how this affects, or how I think this could affect sellers, which I think is going to be a very positive thing. Okay, so let me refresh this video. I'm not going to play the audio. There's really nothing here, but basically these are a crew, if you will, of robots working together in tandem, doing sorting in a facility. This is a real facility. This is not I don't believe it's a fake facility. And it's just interesting. And I'll show you guys another video where it shows like two of them working in a home. So they're trying to build these for the home. What's cool about this is at a large enough scale, your costs go down dramatically for logistics. If we think about prep centers, right? I've co-founded a prep center. The biggest limitation and the biggest cost is human labor. It is very difficult to hire amazing people consistently to grow, and it costs good money to hire good people. So how do you get the cost of prep down to 20 cents and still have high enough quality, all those things? You got to lean on technology. And I think this is kind of where we're going. If you notice the movements here, they're oddly humanistic, right? It's just kind of like looking away from a package and just like moving it down, kind of like a human would. So there's a lot of training going on here. That's pretty interesting. But this is just, it's mind blowing how fast these things are happening. And keep in mind, this company is about, I think, 2 years old at this point. So not super old. Founders doing some incredible stuff. I want to show you this video here. So these are two of their Figure robots. And the whole concept here is, let's give them a bunch of objects they've never seen and have them reason where they should go in a kitchen and work together. So having one robot isolate and work its own thing is one very impressive thing. Having two of them communicate and work together without using language is completely different. And it's just cool because this is not hard coded. This is not teleoperated, meaning there's a human actually controlling them with like VR goggles and stuff like that. These things are actually saying, okay, well, here's what's in front of me. Let me take a look and see where these could go, and I'll move them there. And they get them pretty dead on. And again, working together, one's going to pass a bowl over and say, hey, put that in here. It's, okay, cool, got you. So if you, again, extrapolate this out quite a bit, you find that a lot can and probably will change. I think Casey, we've talked about this previously, where the way large fulfillment centers work, it used to be that humans would have to go find the product. So the product would be stationary, right? Static. It'd be placed somewhere. That's where it is. That's where it's logged. A human has to go and find it. Not very efficient. Therefore, costs are higher. Then you get to a point where you say, okay, well, what if instead of having the human go get it and bring it back, we had a robot as an intermediary? And so you had humans that were picking and saying, okay, here's this, and then the robot would take it to the packer. Nice little hybrid in between. That kind of helped. Then they got to a point where I think they're currently at now, last I looked, which is the human is static. Let's flip it, not the product. The product should come, the human should not move, basically, like physically. Like you have your little cell that they call them, and they have their computer, and it's like, here's what we're doing. And there's that product. We already knew it was coming up 3 orders ago. It's right there, grab it. Okay. So we're leaning on a lot more technology, a lot more automation and robotics to basically be able to make the things more efficient and scalable. Well, eventually, kind of the precipice of this is you get to a point where it's just humanoids and probably a combination of some of those other, currently existing robots. Because these things aren't fast. They're not running, right? This is an iRobot. Yeah. You know what I mean? They're kind of slow, but they can work, every hour that they're not charging. And if they have what's called hot swappable batteries, meaning you just take one out, put another one in, they can just keep on going. So I think in a long enough time horizon, I'm not going to make this prediction on the timeline here. I think a lot of your prep centers turn into this. I think you get to a point where a lot of your prep centers start to consolidate because it's going to be let me phrase this differently. Right now, it's very fractionalized. You have a bunch of small prep centers, not a lot of big ones. For the reasons that I already mentioned, it's very hard to hire and scale. Well, if the hiring and scaling problem is solved, you won't need the fractional. You'll start to centralize quite a bit. And so I think you'll end up with better pricing. I think you'll end up with very large and few prep centers. And again, I think this is a good thing. It's hard to know exactly how this is going to play out, but margins get better for the prep centers. Certainly the cost ideally goes down for prep, and the consistency and quality and reliability goes up as well. So it's one of those things where I like kind of being, vindicated on some of my crazy predictions and be like, there's proof. But again, I've been talking a lot about, the kind of tech stuff that's happening right now. And a lot of what's happening is the components of these things are being built and they work. They're not being applied to our lives as sellers quite yet, but that will change. You're going to start very broad, larger total addressable market. So, these guys are going for like actual manufacturing plants and stuff like that, actual massive fulfillment centers where they have this massive problem and they want 100, if not 1,000 of these things. Whereas, your regular prep center is going to be like, let's get one. Let's just test one. We'll name it Bob, and, we'll kind of go from there. But eventually that will happen.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. Right now, there are, hundreds, if not thousands of prep centers across the United States, and then obviously internationally as well as these or this, whether it's these specific robots or just automation in its form continues to scale up. I think we will kind of see a consolidation as they become more efficient. They'll be able to handle a wider radius of shipping locations, if you will, and then you'll kind of see a consolidation play there. I think you talked about there were a couple Amazon fulfillment centers that specifically tried like lights out with some robots where like a major bill is literally just paying the electricity for the lights. And I think you had mentioned on a previous office hours where there was a couple that had demoed a day, a week, or however long that time period was with no lights on. This would be a step in that direction with the automation via the humanoids. But yeah, I think, like you said, it'll kind of be slowly trickling in where you'll try to have these kind of take a handful of different tasks and have the human employee just be more stationary and kind of handle those last couple detail-oriented things that may not be able to be automated just yet. But having so that they don't have to leave their station, go find for something in a warehouse, like a typical warehouse, and bring it back. That can kind of be streamlined a little bit with these robots. Humanoids is a word that kind of like sticks my hair up on end, but
it's a little dystopian from our media, that's for sure. I don't like using androids, because kind of the same thing, the mind immediately goes to Terminator and Star Wars and stuff like that. It's like, okay, not really ideal. There's something, and I'm because I want to dive into this concept of they're called, I've heard different variations of it, lights out factories. black factories, whatever you want to call them. But the whole concept here is the only reason why you have lights on is because of humans. They need to be able to see. Well, if you have a entire fulfillment center or factory where it's all sensors and robotics, you don't technically need to have the lights on. And so it's kind of like a test, right? It's not like that's where we want to get to. It's really just, could you do that? So it's really a thought experiment of, okay, well, could we get to that point where things just happen and you don't really need a human there? And then you get to a point where, something happened. We do need a human to go in and fix it. Okay, cool. Like, just put on your VR headset, remotely connect to an Android there, go do the repairs. You got these haptic gloves on, go do what you need and just teleport out, basically. Like, can you just basically remote into any one of these? The closest one would be like, I'm taking over you right now. I got to fix this thing. I got to press this button that you don't know how to do, whatever. Okay, go back to your work. I think we do get there. There's a story. I'm going to see if I can pull this up because I always butcher it. But I think it's a really cool concept, the way this is presented. I'm trying to look this up now, so I don't butcher it. But it's a man and a dog is basically what it boils down to. But I just want to get this right. And of course, I'm using Perplexity to find this relatively fast. Let's see if we can get this here.
Yeah, Perplexity came up in my household over the weekend. My family's like, have you ever heard of Perplexity? I was like, actually, I have, yeah.
You're like way too often, actually.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that, but my mom's getting more efficient on the internet. She's checking out Perplexity. She knows what's going on.
I'm curious. What's your family think of this kind of stuff?
I have a few members of my family who are very into it, streamlining, expediting different things, cutting down on manual work, things like that. I don't think like scared is the right term. I think initial apprehension in AI/automation in some areas is the initial reaction.
Okay.
But definitely kind of coming around a little bit more. My dad's pretty old school, which is funny. Not that he's against it. He's just like, I just don't trust it. It's just like, he's like, I'd just rather do it myself. It's like, that makes, you are
I get it.
Part of that generation. So that makes sense.
Totally get it. Yeah. So I found this. Okay. So the famous quip about the factory of the future requiring only 2 employees, a man and a dog. The man is there to basically take care of the factory or to watch over the factory. And the dog is there to make sure that the man doesn't touch anything. And this kind of is like the thought experiment of these light out manufacturing fulfillment center kind of concepts where you got to have somebody overlook things, but like, it's kind of don't get in the way. Like, it works, like you're only needed if something breaks. And that ideally, if it's built correctly, is not very common. And this came out of, this says the origins of the quote, 1970s British telecom roots. So it was kind of like a joke, but people are like, that's actually kind of a cool concept to consider here. So it's one of those kind of allegories that kind of stick in my mind. But yeah, it's a very interesting concept. It seems like this is where a lot of people are trying to get to eventually. I have seen a few examples, small scale, where they have tried to directly solve that problem. But there's so much complexity to make that true, right? There's so many edge cases and stuff like that. If you have one product, it's dramatically easier. But when you're doing something like a fulfillment center where things are so varied, dramatically more difficult. But what's interesting with these robotics, with these humanoid robotics, they have dexterity. And so they're able to say, I've never seen this before. I'll figure out how to pick it up safely, and we're good here. So, you start to generalize these things, and it makes them way more flexible. See, Kyle spoke with Finn after hours Tuesday. Reezy's protege. Mints, thank you. I'm pumped that we were able to get you in there super fast. Kyle, I know Reezy texted me, was like, we got to get this guy in. So glad we were able to get you in super fast. Let's see. Eric, Dylan, what's your edge on the import tariffs on Chinese sellers versus USA sellers on the marketplace? Competitive advantage. I'm not an economist, and I'm not the well-read on tariffs. What I will say is my theory is that the tariffs are being used as a negotiation tactic. We've already seen them be reversed in a few ways. So I think they are not necessarily meant to be there forever or create massive change systemically. It seems like they're used as a tool to get something else to occur. That's what I think is happening. With China, I think it's very different, though. I think there's way more complexity to that scenario. So it's hard for me to say. They have already kind of punted I forget exactly what it's called, but basically like the weight or the price kind of loophole. They've already kind of, they blocked it and then they unblocked it for a period of time. So that leads me to believe it's more of a negotiation tactic in the long run. Casey, do you have any thoughts on that?
I would put my chips firmly in your corner as well. I'm not as well read up on these areas as I probably should be. But yeah, I think it is much like a lot of the moving pieces around it right now. I think you're right. It seems to be positioning for negotiation. So it's tough to determine like what's actually going to be implemented, where it's going to make that impact, and who it's going to impact the most. But yeah, that is actually something, Eric, I've been meaning to read up on a little bit more, knowing that'll probably impact some of our customers. But I'll keep you updated as I come across more findings. Right now, it doesn't seem like there's anything super concrete, so tough to determine where that's really going to influence the day-to-day or the bottom line for most folks.
Yeah. Wish I had better answers. I don't love that kind of stuff, to be honest. So that's why I don't tend to gravitate towards. That's why I could talk about AI and stuff for hours. But this is something that, so, it's funny. It's similar to the port strike that we had going into the holidays last year. Big deal, was going to shut down quite a lot. They postponed it, and I've yet to hear anything related to it. And so, the whole idea was, well, we're going to reassess and kick back off in January once the holidays are kind of done, just so the country can keep running. I assume some deal got made because nobody's talked about it since, from what I've seen. And that's something I was keeping in mind and looking up pretty consistently, because that could have halted a lot of logistics. But I think if you go back in history and look at tariffs and stuff like that, I think they can work. But I think in modern times, it's probably better as a negotiation tactic for the most part. But again, China is such a different scenario compared to all the other countries we're doing tariffs to. So I do want to keep that in mind. See, Kyle, great question here. Figured out why many of my listings are going directly to max price, which caused suppressed listings on Amazon. Do I need to manually reset my prices so Aura sees it and starts repricing again? Aura seems to shut down once the listing is suppressed and never picks it back up to reprice. So yes, that is correct. So basically what's happening is whenever you get hit with like a potential high pricing error, Amazon's going to make that listing inactive, and we can't update a price in an inactive state. So basically what you need to do is update the price in Seller Central so that it goes back into an active state, and Aura will automatically pick that up and start repricing for you based on your settings. So that will help a lot there. Yeah.
And just an extra tip there, Kyle. Most commonly, the most common cause for deactivations, high pricing hours, are going to be tied to mins and maxes set in Seller Central. Aura is blind to mins and maxes set in any other platform other than Aura. So I usually recommend either removing your max prices so you don't have to worry about that high pricing error in Seller Central, or you can line up your prices between both platforms so they're consistent there, and Aura can work within the same range. But yeah, if a listing does get deactivated, it'll be moved either to an inactive or out of stock status in Aura. But once you reactivate that in Seller Central, we'll be able to pick that up and start repricing again.
Yeah. See, Eric, the port strike cost me a lot. Used to bring a container for $2K, went up to $7K. Yeah, I'm curious, Eric, have you heard anything about the port strike continuing? Is it a thing that's going on and just nobody's talking about it, or did it kind of fizzle out? I'm curious. I know during the port strike when it was active, everything kind of got really crazy, but I am curious if that has pulled back a bit from your experience, because I'd like to keep more tabs on what's happening there, but it seems like the media is not really covering it anymore.
Yeah, I think I initially heard that they had made some adjustments to the initial interim deal to make it a more long-term deal, but no real insight other than that. But
yeah, fun times. No, I guess it was a money move, I guess. Yeah, but see, this this is what's so interesting. A lot of these things are used in negotiation tactics. It's just like, hey, here's our cards. Here's what we can do. We don't want to, but if you do what we want, then we'll take our cards off the table. I kind of get it, but also really annoying because it affects everyone else. So that's a bit frustrating. So yeah, hopefully that all kind of recovered. But yeah, so, kind of shifting gears here, making a lot of progress on the Walmart side. There's a lot there that we're working with their team on to kind of make adjustments with, kind of help them build out the API a little bit better. They're definitely newer, so there's a few things we're like, we'd like to have this kind of data. We're used to seeing that. Like, yeah, we don't give that to you. So, we're finding a lot of interesting use cases and workarounds for getting data that is just not readily available, which is going to make it even better. But it's funny. It's a lot of reverse engineering. I know I've joked about this before, being a seller is very frustrating in a lot of times. And I thought switching to the developer side would be far less troubling. And although it is just a different kind of pain. Things just randomly don't work. Like right now, Slack is down. Well, why is Slack down? Because, AWS is basically down. Well, the majority of the internet runs on AWS, Amazon Web Services. And you're just like, okay, like not much you can do there, so it's kind of funny how there's a lot of, building software sitting on top of other infrastructure as they all are. Those things can also have downtime and kind of weird things that occur. So, but it's been good. We're really picking up massive development speed right now, which is fantastic. So we should have something here in a few weeks for beta testing, at least internally. And yeah, it's going to be fun. It's a lot simpler in reality. There's some edge cases and some unique things, as we talk to sellers about what they want to be able to do and not be able to do. Looking at things like competitive price is a very unique thing with Walmart, the way they do it. And so, we're finding these kind of differences and saying, okay, well, what does that mean? How do we do that correctly? What do sellers want in that way? So we're having a ton of discussions, which has been fantastic. See, Eric, sign me up. Eric, we will definitely reach out once we get to that point. That's for sure. Let's see, Omar. I'm very new to Aura early stage. I know it's helping me make more margin, but it's hard for me to quantify that. Not that I need exact numbers, but I'm just thinking about how to determine how much it's impacting my business. Yeah, this is a really good one. We've thought about this question a lot in the early days of, can we truly show the delta? And when you get rational about it, or logical, should I say, there's only kind of one way that you can really do that, which is like a price update occurred before a sale happened. Therefore, it should be attributed. But then again, we could have updated your price 2 days ago and it didn't need to change for 2 days. And then you got a sale. Well, technically that should be attributed too. Attribution for stuff like this is really difficult. Like looking at Google ads, they do a lot of, attributions, right? They need to be able to say that trial or that new customer came from us and here's when they came from. Well, as it turns out, there's a menu of ways to do that. There's first touch, last touch, and then algorithmically. And those are like the base, 3 ways of doing that. And, some people say, oh, it should always be first touch, or, oh, it should always be last touch, or depending on what the campaign's designed to do, that could change. So in reality, it's kind of difficult to do. But what I try to tell people is, especially during a trial, I think this is the best way to know if a repricing software is a good fit for you. Did you make more? Did you make additionally more than it would have cost you to pay for it during your free trial before even giving a credit card? That's kind of my barometer, right? Did it pay for itself basically? Because now it's upside. On average, and this is true for legacy Aura, so old Aura, if you were coming from no repricing, we tend to see about a 60% increase in sales. If you're coming from a different repricing software, we tend to see a 40 to 60% increase in sales. So, we haven't really looked at that for 1.0, but it is objectively higher to be honest. Just because it's a dramatically better platform, way more performant. There's a lot of things under the hood that are happening that make that performance possible. But yeah, it's, I sometimes stay up late at night thinking about this exact question because I would love to be able to solve it. It's one of those things that's just like, we can kind of solve it, but we have to make our own assumptions, and you have to be able to agree with those assumptions. And that gets kind of, not everybody's on the same page sometimes. Yeah, go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, it's tough to quantify at times, especially because the landscape of a listing can change so rapidly. So it's not as easy as being like, hey, I'm getting more sales now than I was prior, just because that can change so much. But I typically recommend looking at before, just whether it's 30 days, 2 weeks, 1 week, just looking at the side-to-side comparison of your overall metrics using and not using Aura. Obviously, depending on your strategies and your goals, you may be more focused on sales velocity. So you might have a slight lower sale price, but you're selling more. Obviously, the inverse is true. You could be looking for more margin, lower sales velocity. So that's really going to depend on your approach. But I would generally just try and do a side-by-side comparison of when repricing was active on this listing, when was it not active, and comparing those two side by side. Just because, it can be performing very well on a listing, and then Amazon gets on that listing or another competitor gets on that listing, and you'll see still moderate success, but maybe that average sale price drops. So there are just so many factors to take into account. I do think the best pure an analytical view to take is just repricing was on, repricing wasn't, side by side. What's that look like? In addition to obviously the increase in margin and sales, that's what we all want. But another big value play for Aura is just time savings. You're not having to manually monitor your listings, making sure that you're staying competitive. It really frees you up to do more sourcing or more other activities or tasks.
Oh, it looks like we lost him there for a second. But basically what Casey's saying is we're freeing up a lot of time too. So that's something a lot of people don't really kind of, think about. But one thing I do want to highlight, we've had a lot of users over the years ask, hey, can I A/B test Aura? I'm like, well, no, you really can't statistically significantly do it because, if you take two separate SKUs and you say, well, one's going to use Aura, one's not. Well, those are two very separate scenarios. So one thing you could do, it's funny. There's this behavioral thing that occurs where when you first kick off repricing for the first time, your sales go up and you're like, oh, cool. But then that just becomes the new norm, right? We basically reset your baseline. And so when people are like, I'm not sure if it's, still working the best, turn it off and see what happens and watch your sales dwindle. It's a very weird human behavior where we just normalize so many things. But the moment that thing changes, you're like, oh, okay. All right, we're good here. But I did want to highlight here, Omar, thank you for responding and the thoughtful response. I'm out of trial, but for sure I've covered my costs. And that's the first metric I look at. We're not very salesy here. So the first thing I tell people is like, did you do that? That's my first barometer that it's a good time, because a lot of sellers, especially newer sellers, are always asking themselves, when do I do this? It's whenever you have enough sales that you could cover the cost of the software at your current level. So if you're on early stage, that's $27 a month. Do you think that increasing your sales 40% would make you an extra $27 over the course of the 14-day trial? And if it doesn't, you didn't give us a credit card. So there's nothing to lose there, which is good. So food for thought, but I'm glad that you hit that barometer. That's fantastic.
Speaking of relying on other platforms, sorry, my internet just crashed for a moment there. But yeah, just the last thought I was in the middle of was, if you were to pay yourself to do your own repricing manually, would it be more or less per hour over the course of a month to your subscription cost? That's like a different way I try to quantify it. But.
Yeah. Basically, the entire internet is shutting down today for whatever reasons. We've got to figure it out. Zoom, everything, Slack is down. It has been absolutely insane. So, this is interesting, Eric. I've seen Aura perform really good on high velocity listings, selling over the buy box price. Any insights on that? Yes. So, you're most likely using Maven as your strategy or AI strategy for that listing. Maven is able, I talk about this in terms of pressure. And I'm coming at this from an economics perspective. If you have a increased amount of competition, what happens to the price? Basic economics, supply and demand, the price is going to go down. That's downward pressure because the supply side is much higher than the demand side. Therefore, it must rebalance. Otherwise, nothing happens. So what we've found, though, is that downward pressure goes too far. It doesn't balance the way it should. It actually goes beyond the balance. And the balance we call the optimal price, where it really could be at. And so what Maven's able to do is say, okay, well, here's where we're at. This is all this pressure. Let's relieve some of that pressure. And so we found a way to be able to basically get sales above the buy box without you having to do anything. Is that also true on non-high velocity listings? It is, but it can happen far less. So when you have listings where you have a lot of velocity, you have a lot of consistent activity and changes, those things tend to happen faster and more frequently. So that's one way to look at it. But yeah, Maven's designed to do exactly what you're experiencing there, which is fantastic to hear. And it's nice when it's happening on high velocity things, because when you're getting those sales above the buy box, we're not really pulling back on velocity that much, which is great. You're not really making that trade where you're like, yeah, I'm getting, huge ROI, but I'm selling a tenth of what I could have. I'd rather sell, 80% of what I could have and, still be 40% higher than where I was on price. Yeah, it's a sweet spot, right? And so Maven's able to basically in real time calculate what that sweet spot is. We call it the optimal price. And depending on what's happening in real time, make a decision to say, we should go there now. Now's a good time to do it. Now's not a good time to do it. It's very behavioral in that way. See Angel here. I was on the early stage program as I was making less than 10K in sales, which for the price, it really helped. However, during Black Friday and the holidays, I did pretty well and got kicked off the early stage and now back to under 10K per month on the regular plan due to the 2-month average. Yeah, so our plans do look at the average of the last 60 days of your sales. Now, what you should have seen there, Angel, is whenever you did get pushed up to Essential, which is that next tier, you should have received a 50% discount the first 3 months there to smooth that cost curve out. You're not able to go backwards, but it's a good thing. I know you're like, well, now I'm paying more. Yes, but only because you crushed it during Q4 at the Black Friday and stuff like that. And so what we tried to get users to understand is you do want to find that kind of sweet spot for your plan, because you are going to go into Q4 and you are going to crush it in Q4. Now you can definitely, outside of early stage, because it's its own kind of thing, you can go up and down within Essential and Pro and Plus. But I don't recommend people to downgrade during the slow months, because what's going to happen is you're going to get used to that and you can lose your credits, right? So if you're used to using all 50 credits on Pro and you go down to Plus, well, you lost some of those credits. And so now you're giving something up essentially. And what you don't want to have happen is, listen, Q4 sneaks up on all of us, right? We're already almost into March, which is crazy. Q4 is going to get here faster than you realize. And you don't want to end up in a position where you're like, cool, things are taking off. Crap, I forgot I downgraded. Now I got to go deal with that. I got to go re-upgrade and blah, 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 blah. Instead, you want to find that solid baseline based on your revenue that you tend to see and look at the extremes. I think that's super important too. A lot of sellers are going to do 50% of their annual revenue at minimum during Q4. Kind of take those averages and look at that and see what makes sense. That's kind of how I approach it personally.
Yeah, I always think if there's anyone who knows they're going to be around for the whole year, those annual plans are always a great option. If you're typically at a lower tier during this time of the year, if you are locked into an annual plan, you won't be upgraded if you generate more money during a certain time period. So I definitely recommend locking in any annual plans. You do also get 2 free months compared to the monthly option on that same tier. So a couple different benefits there. But yeah, I think Dylan makes a very good point specifically on hyperdrive credits. That's going to be the most impactful thing for specifically repricing speed. If you're not using all of your hyperdrive credits, I highly recommend you do so. There's no downside to using all of your credits. All it does is submit price updates more quickly when one is required based on your strategy settings. So definitely make sure you're using all of those based on your specific plan there.
Yep. Anthony, my numbers in Aura are different than those in SellerAmp? Am I doing something wrong in settings anywhere? My assumption is probably not. Now, I will say, when you look at different Amazon software tools, they will have different calculations because of what they may or may not be factoring in. So like, we're not factoring in prep costs as an example. We're not factoring in inbound shipping costs. So those could be the reasons why those numbers are different. What you're really seeing in Aura on the dashboard is you're seeing your gross margin. We're looking at fees, we're looking at your costs, and we're looking at what you sold it for. This is something we do want to reassess and get more granular with those things. So you do have to keep in mind, if the softwares are designed for the same outcome, I would compare them. If they're designed for different outcomes, like SellerAmp is a sourcing tool, I would expect the numbers to be slightly different, just because they're going to factor in some different things that we may not. Very common. So I don't think you're doing anything wrong, but it's always worth reaching out to support and saying, hey, can we just like double check my account? I just want to make sure that I'm not telling you, hey, probably not, and you not look at it. I would rather us as a team look at it, just triple check, let you know, hey, no, you're not doing anything wrong here. Everything's set up correctly. That's why you're seeing some different numbers. But very common. In the early days, we had a lot of sellers be like, hey, like, Aura's saying this, they're saying that. What's the difference? I have no idea, because I'm not inside their code. I don't know where they're pulling data from. I don't know how they're, manipulating that information. I have no idea. So anytime we try to compare like fees and stuff like that, we'll use the Amazon FBA calculator. But as Casey has learned, even that doesn't math correctly sometimes. So we kind of have to lean on Amazon's API for things like fees and stuff like that. And sometimes they are incorrect, but we can't fix it. It basically has to self-correct. Amazon, like every software, has weird issues every now and then. And they will be like, yeah, that's incorrect. It'll update soon. We're like, all right, cool. It is what it is. But that's our source of truth. So even if it's the source of truth is incorrect, that's all we have to go off of. In lieu of, things like fees and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can paint some more color for you there, Anthony, as well.
Yeah.
So Aura will automatically factor in your referral and your fulfillment fees. We grab those straight from Seller Central and Amazon. That also does include low inventory fees, which is a newer fee. Was working with a handful of folks where it was being factored in and then it wasn't. So that was unfortunately an issue on Amazon's end.
Yep.
But any additional costs you take on to sell an item, like Dylan mentioned, inbound shipping costs, any prep costs, if you're an FBM seller, your own shipping costs, you'll definitely just want to bake those into the cost field so that those are accounted for in ROI, margin, profit calculations. And then one more thing to note as well is when a sale does come through, or initially estimates what those sales metrics look like based on the current price of your listing. But once Amazon officially finalizes and processes that sale, they send us the updated data. So there may be some delay or lag in that being perfectly accurate. It can be anywhere from a couple hours. Sometimes it is a day or two, depending on the specific listing, Amazon's workload, a couple different factors there. But you can expect a slight discrepancy between what you're actually seeing in Seller Central and Aura, but it will eventually correct once we get that correct data from Amazon and Seller Central there.
Yeah, this is the difficult part. There's no one place to get data with the API. You basically have to pull it from 5 different variations. And sometimes things are included, sometimes they're not. Sometimes we have to wait for something else to confirm, and then we can kind of port that in. So it's very complicated at the end of the day. See, Walmart Repricer will be taking into consideration Amazon pricing in order to reprice it, or it will not cross-reference. So yeah, this is a great question. As it currently stands, we will not be doing straight price matching. I think that's a simple strategy type that if you want that, we'll probably support it. But we really want to build a truly native Walmart repricer. So, we'll be looking at things like the competitive price, and that could be Walmart, it could be someone else. So where that's included on listings, we'll take a look at that. V1 of this will not use it necessarily. V2 probably will, because there's a few interesting things with the competitive price that we're looking at. But no, I don't want to simply match your price on Walmart with the price on Amazon. You can get higher sales on Walmart. It's a different platform. I know the way Walmart is position that they want to factor in Amazon to make sure they're competitive and stuff like that. But there again, there is a sweet spot for how you do that. And I think the Band-Aid of just match my price on Amazon is a really big missed opportunity. So we will be factoring it in, but it won't be the foundation of a strategy for Walmart repricing, if that makes sense. Guys have some awesome questions today. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a good session.
And glad we were able to answer that for you. You know, it's funny. I'm seeing far more posts on Walmart where the sentiment's starting to shift on Twitter. Things we've been talking about, right? Grass is always greener. Well, now we're seeing, or at least I'm seeing, a bunch of posts on Twitter, which is, you know, everybody who was breaking TOS and doing all the shady stuff on Amazon and got kicked off are now trying to do that on Walmart. And it's like, oh, it's fine. It's like, no, you have a rude awakening coming. The platform doesn't matter. You still have to operate professionally. You still have to, you know, meet TOS. You still have to understand those things. You still have to build a real business here. You can't just jump onto a relatively new platform and expect the old hacks of Amazon to work on Walmart. Some will because you got lucky, but they're going to patch those things relatively fast. And you don't build a sustainable, successful business on hacks. It's just not how it works. Not, you know, so it's kind of funny, you know, when we started to really kind of share our perspective on these things, and everybody's like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. And now everybody's like, yep, there it is. The grass is not always greener, but again, you know, I mentioned in a lot of podcasts and you know, private groups that I do think that the future is going to be mainly multi-channel. And I'm starting to see, at least this week, more so than past, posts talking about that and just being like, yeah, the hack is to sell on both. It's more complicated, but it's very interesting when you view it from a portfolio approach of, you know, there's pros and cons here and there's pros and cons here. Let's take advantage of those things. So it's cool to see, you know, people kind of get to that realization relatively fast as a community instead of letting it drag on another year and it's, you know, the holy grail. It's like, no, it's just different. Like, it's great, but it's different. Let's see, Anthony, can you touch on hyperdrive and how it helps, please? Casey, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Anthony, typically Amazon limits repricing speed to 2 minutes, meaning that based on your strategy, if a price change is required, it's going to take 2 minutes for us to send that update to Amazon for them to process it and then have it reflected on the Amazon listing page. Our clever engineering team over my left shoulder here was able to find a coding hack, fix, whatever you want to call it, where essentially we're able to cut that repricing from 2 minutes down to 10 seconds or less. So by being able to submit that price update to Amazon more quickly, that's going to lead to them processing your update more quickly. Typically, you know, it takes, like I said, 2 minutes. If it takes that much longer for a competitor to then respond to your price update, but then you can respond in 10 seconds again, you can essentially nullify any updates coming from competitive sellers because you'll have that foot in the door, getting those updates in there more quickly. So that's why I always recommend using, all of the credits are allotted to you. There are different credits depending on your specific plan as well. It's going to be most effective on listings where there's either a lot of pricing activity or a lot of competitors, or it does operate on price offers and price changes. So those are still required for an update to then be sent. But that's definitely going to improve and increase your pricing speed, therefore your buy box time and ownership. So definitely recommend using that on your most important listings or ones you really want to focus on that have a lot of velocity there.
And here's one way to think about it. Instant repricing doesn't technically mean instant. It means instant in our system, what we can control. But there's this global bottleneck, which is when you submit updates to Amazon, they have to process it. And so when Casey mentions that 2 minutes, that's on average. It could be 10, 15 minutes sometimes if they're really overloaded. And so there's an interesting thing where you're able to speed that up and do that full round trip in that 10 seconds. So it's a theoretical 12x increase in speed, but we've already given you instant. But, you know, you got to understand what instant really means. And, you know, we try to be transparent about those things. Where a lot of companies don't want to talk about it. We're super transparent. Here's exactly how the API works on that. We found a way to work around it, and that's awesome. And all you have to do, by the way, is press a button. Just hit a little toggle and say, yes, do hyperdrive for me, please. And we say, great, we got you covered. Don't worry about it. So it's a big deal. And, you know, I think we're still the only repricing company that has a hyperdrive feature, which is pretty cool. So it's definitely an Aura exclusive. See, Eric, hard part is being able to control the inventory on both without breaking a leg. Yeah, that's the hard part, right? And, you know, part of that multi-channel approach is it creates a different kind of complexity and it creates different problems, but those problems can be solved. I fundamentally believe it's a data problem. And so you just need the right software to basically help you analyze those things independent of one another as well as combined. And then you're able to use that information to make better decisions. So that will come. You know, we're still in the early days of this multi-channel approach for the most part. You know, there's not a lot of great software solving that problem quite yet, that are not like enterprise level and stuff like that, which that's overkill, massive contracts, or just, you know, $1,000 a month, which is just crazy. Hyperdrive for Walmart. I can't say anything on that, Eric, but I agree. See, Angel, I'm excited to try out your beta for Walmart. Yeah, we're very excited. This has been really fun so far. Diving in, learning a lot. It's a very different platform, but very similar at the same time. There's just subtle nuances you have to be aware of. And if you're not, you're going to make a bad decision. BSR is the best one that I know we've talked about before. The way the BSR works on Walmart is very different than the way it works on Amazon. You cannot assume everything is one-to-one. Some things very much just are, but, you know, it's always worth testing those things to see if that's actually true. You know, test your assumptions. Let's see. Is there anything you recommend for us to do if the buy box is lower than our min price? Yes, you have two options. Lower your min price, or look at the Keep It chart and see if that's a short-term downgrade. I'm a huge fan of using data for this. There are times when the market has just shifted and you've lost. Get your money back, recoup, try to break even at minimum, try not to lose money, but like get your capital out of that inventory. If you see in the Keep It chart that it's a short-term thing, I would probably hold out because it could just be one seller just really trying to liquidate. And, you know, if I notice that it's really only one person doing it, I'll go and do the whole 999 trick and see, okay, they got 20 units. We're moving about 10 units per day, you know, as a whole. If we wait them out 2 days, we're back to where we were and life is good again. I'm willing to wait people out if I can tell it's a short-term temporary thing. But you can tell in the Keep It chart very quickly, if the price has been consistently going down and it's actually tanking, you need to react to that relatively fast. But if it's just a step change down and it's only been like that for, you know, a little bit, see who it is, dig a little bit deeper, get more confidence if that's a temporary or non-temporary thing, and then make a decision based on that. Great question, by the way. Love that question. I know my initial answer, not the best answer, but that's just kind of the reality of it. You really have to be unemotional about your inventory. You cannot be emotional about it. Can't do it. It's all numbers. That mindset alone will help you make the right decisions. But you guys are absolutely, I want to hype you guys up because you're asking some incredible questions today. So really appreciate that. Makes it way more fun for us when you guys come in and brain dump on us. That's what we want here. That's what this session is for. So appreciate that. We got about 10-ish minutes left for the session. So any other questions, any other rabbit holes you want to go down, and it doesn't have to just be repricing. It could be larger questions as well. You know, we got asked about the tariffs. You know, granted, we didn't have great answers for that, but, you know, we like those kind of thought-provoking things too. You know, sometimes you have those burning questions and you just don't know who to ask. Ask us. Worst case, we'll tell you, no idea. You know, best case, I have a pretty, you know, concise and clear answer for you. Middle case, I might refer you somewhere else who I think might have the answer. So either way, we'll get you somewhere. You know, it might not be very far, but we'll get you some progress. That's for sure. Got to have fun with it. See, Eric. Honestly, Aura has become a key for the business we did. Almost 41% ROI on Feb. Thank you guys. See, that's the whole point, right? A repricing tool, especially when you're a newer seller, getting started with repricing is a very overwhelming thing. Feels complicated and confusing, and you don't want to mess things up. And that's why we're so hands-on with our users. You want a one-on-one onboarding session? We got you. We want to give you the confidence that, one, this will work for you, and two, that you can do that. And there is nothing special about any other user using a repricing tool compared to you. Everybody gets started. Everybody feels the same way when they first get started. And so our job as a team is, how do I remove some of that overwhelm feeling? And from a product perspective, how do I remove the complexity so it's not overwhelming when you're jumping in, trying to make changes and get set up, and get you to this outcome as fast as possible. This is what I want every single one of our users to experience, and every one of our potential users to experience, because it does change the game when you get it right. And we're here to help you get it right. See, Anthony, 40.9% ROI for me. You guys are oddly close in ROI. I dig that. That's a little too close, No, I'm just kidding. That's fantastic, Anthony and Eric. Love to hear that, guys. That this is what drives us forward. So I appreciate you guys sharing that. You didn't have to do that, but I really appreciate it. Okay, 40.8. Okay, so Eric was rounding up. Okay, but it was same delta, Eric. It's just 0.01. Come on. Or 0.1, sorry. See, Anthony, any advice on lowering placement fees? Great question. I don't have a great answer on this. The person I would reach out to on this actually is Chris Grant, Clear the Shelf. Cleartheshelf.com, or on Twitter. I think that's his handle as well. I think he's got some good stuff on doing that as well. The placement fees have shifted a little bit throughout my years. Some of them, in my opinion, you can't fully control. Some you kind of can. So it kind of depends. But I know that there are people on Twitter. Listen, if you're not on FBA Twitter, and when I say FBA Twitter, just Twitter and a bunch of FBA sellers, the amount of alpha there, as the kids like to say, is insane. Everybody's just like, oh, I did this whole deep analysis, and here it is for my business. Trader Soros does this quite often on shipping. He did one this morning. Was like, here's my priority list for shipping carriers. USPS for less than 1 pound. Broke it down. I mean, it was absolutely phenomenal. So there's a lot of people that are able to steer you in the right direction with data, not just here's what I think, but here's the data to back it. See, Angel, I'm at 219% thanks to Aura. Angel, what are you selling? That's insane. And is that sustainable? Because that's crazy awesome. If I see 30%, I'm happy. 30% ROI, I'm like, heck yeah. Like, consistent, man. 219% is fantastic. Eric, yes, what's the store name? See, this is what's cool about our community. Everybody wants to share everything. The moment you ask for a store name, they're like, I can't. No, I'm good. You're not getting my inventory. I love it. But you always got to throw it out there, man. I appreciate that. That's good stuff right there. I love it. Storefront stocking was my favorite thing when I was a seller, especially for wholesale. I mean, you could create an infinitely scalable loop process where you just constantly have 10 brands a day to call, and overnight they'd be replenished, and you would just never run out of brands. Absolutely amazing. Kyle, you're telling me I have to resub to Twitter. Honestly, I think you should. I'm not a big social media guy, but Twitter has been phenomenal, and there's a lot of, it's a different kind of way to communicate. I think, the Discord groups are really cool. But Twitter, because it's out in the public, kind of anybody can jump into those conversations and network. And the Discord groups feels like a subset of those. Like, a lot of those guys will be like, oh, we should just have like a private group where we can talk about things, share more details in it, not get leaked and whatever. And they kind of go down that route. And I think those are fantastic too, but I think you kind of need both. I think you sometimes just need to stumble on some random FBA knowledge and nuggets and be like, oh, that's cool. I'll share it with my community now. And that's how this information just propagates throughout the different communities. See, VM, there are apps/services that show sellers and ASIN sales now. There are. Smart Scouts map does a pretty good job at estimating sales. I don't know if it shows ASIN sales, but it does show if they're, wholesale, RA, OA, or private label. But that's a pretty good one too. But it's really using like geographical maps of where the company is located and stuff like that. So slightly different, but see, Eric, we'll probably end on this question here. What are your thoughts on arbitrage moving forward? A lot. If you think about how do you scale OA? It's more time on a keyboard, right? It's just more time. It comes down to how effective are you at finding deals and how efficient are you at doing that? Well, most people, when they start to scale, they bring on virtual assistants. It's affordable labor rate, more time on the keyboard. That's what they're doing. The problem, though, is if I say I need you to 10x your sourcing efforts in the next 30 days, you would really struggle, because that means you would have to hire 10x the amount of VAs, onboard them, train them, and hope they do well. And not all are going to pass. Some are going to flame out, blah, blah, blah. I do believe that we get to a point, probably the end of this year, I think is more realistic, that AI agents will be able to do a lot of that work for you. And then I think it becomes a speed thing. So I think arbitrage will still exist, but I think it will change, as it always has, right? There was a time when I tried OA and there's hardly any software to help you outside of Keepa, and I was horrible at it. Now there's so much software. It's insane. So it's going to continue to evolve as the tech evolves itself. We're just at an interesting point in time where the tech itself is changing exponentially, and what is it enabling you to do is very different. Like, a lot of software is just speeding you up. This is fundamentally changing what you are able to do, not just making it happen faster for you. And so because of that, I do think it's going to change a little bit. I have a few theories as to how I think it's going to play out, but I think it comes down to how fast can you deploy capital. I think that's going to be a big deal. That's my current thoughts. They're kind of evolving week after week as I see things and kind of think it through more. But my initial thought is it will just change how you do it. It will still exist. And whoever can spend capital faster is probably going to crush it more than somebody who can spend it slower. That's my initial thought. But this has my gears turning 24/7. I think about this quite a lot. So, but we will end it there. Appreciate everybody, making the time, giving us some awesome questions and comments and sharing some feedback on Aura. It's been fantastic, but listen, guys, we do this every single Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST. However, please don't wait to ask us questions. Jump into live chat on Aura, ask our support team, ask Casey, ask Finn questions. We want to make sure that you're set up for success. We don't want you to have these burning questions. We want to be able to answer them, help you out. And listen, if you're getting started with repricing, please schedule a personal onboarding session. It's like 20 minutes. It's free. We're not checking to see if you qualify. If you have an Aura account, you qualify. We want to make sure that we can give you that confidence, like we talked about previously, to be able to crush it like some of these other sellers that we're sharing feedback are doing now. So with that, we'll let you get back to the rest of your week. Casey?
Have a good week, everybody. See you then.
Thanks, everyone.